Before we begin, we'd like to give special thanks to all of our sponsors for making this event possible each year. Specifically, thank you to CRL FormFox for being our title sponsor for 6 consecutive years. And thank you to our platinum sponsors, Psychmedics, OraSure Technologies, Quest Diagnostics, and Veriforce. Hi, and thank you so much for joining us for another session of Day with DISA. This session is a drug testing update with a focus on the rise of fentanyl. Today, we're joined by Dr. David Kuntz, the Executive Director of Analytical Toxicology at Clinical Reference Laboratory, or CRL. Dr. Kuntz, how are you doing today?
Doing very well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we were just chatting. This is the 6th year in a row that you've participated in Day with DISA. So thank you so much for being someone that we can count on to bring great information consistently every year to Day with DISA.
Well, it's a pleasure to be able to do this and also an honor to be able to do it for so long. So thank you.
Yeah, we're lucky to have you. Well, before we jump into the presentation, I want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, use the Q&A button at the bottom right of the player. If you have any questions that we're unable to answer today, we'll reach back out to you after Day with DISA. Additionally, we're going to make a copy of this presentation available for download on the Materials tab at the end of the session. With that being said, Dr. Kuntz, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Today I'm going to talk about evolving trends in drugs of abuse. So I'm going to focus on fentanyl today, since it's obviously one of the most talked about drugs of abuse right now across the United States. And this is my personal information. If you needed to get a hold of me for any of those reasons, following this, I'll be happy to chat with you as well. So today's talk is going to be about fentanyl. And I thought I would start with the recent waves of fentanyl, or at least opioid addiction dependence in the United States. As I've done more reading, I decided to go back a little ways. And the first widespread abuse of opioids actually goes back to the United States' Civil War, which is quite surprising. And, during the Civil War, there's, tremendous casualties and injuries, and the use of opium was started then. So just to give you a little idea about how much it was used, it was used extensively by the Union Army. I think the Union Army had access to more opium than the Confederate. But during that period of time, the literature says there was like 10 million opium pills and 2.8 million ounces of opium tinctures and powders. So that became, really the initial widespread drugs of abuse problem in the United States, because the soldiers were severely injured, they became addicted, and they needed things to happen. And it wasn't really until like 1914 with the Harrison Narcotic Act that there was some government overview of what's going on. So as we get into more recent times and where we're at right now, the first wave, more current, within the last 25 years, started with the opioid prescriptions, with the fake pain management clinics, if you will. They were dispensing opioids by the tens of thousands. They're created in strip malls, and the southeast of the United States was particularly hard hit. So that led to the United States controlling the production, and some of these pill factories were essentially taken down along with the whole system. And that goes to the old story of the Sacklers with Purdue Pharma and all of those movies that have been out there lately. So that got controlled, and then that led to the heroin problem. Because if I'm an opioid addicted individual, heroin is my next available drug on the street. But heroin it's got a long history. It goes back centuries, but there's a lot of work that goes into from poppy seeds and eating acres and acres of land in Afghanistan, if you will, to production and extracting and purification and distribution. So that had kind of a shorter lifespan because the synthetic opiates, which we're going to talk about specifically, is fentanyl. Fentanyl was easy to make. You can do it in your garage. You can do it in your basement. All you need is a starter chemicals, and we'll kind of go through that in a second. But the number of deaths associated with this are enormous. Now, in the one bullet under there says there was 100,000 annual deaths from opioids, or at least overdose. 75% of those are due to fentanyl. 75%, and you hear all the time, and almost every family has issues with some kind of narcotic abuse or fatality along the way. Now, one of the other interesting aspects of this is we think of this, we've gotten so used to this. But now you take a look at the last 3 wars we've been involved with. There was Vietnam, there was 58,000 deaths. Afghanistan, there was 2,400. Iraq, there was about 4,500. So when you add those all up, it's around 65,000 soldiers that died in those conflicts over decades. We're losing that many and plus every year from fentanyl. So that puts it in a little bit into perspective of that the wars aren't as bad as what we now have going on in our neighborhoods. So as we've all heard, fentanyl is 100 times more potent than morphine, 50 times more potent than heroin. And the seized amount of fentanyl in 2022 was enough to kill just about everybody in the United States. Now, the fentanyl, we CRL, as you know, I'm working at CRL. We've done some positivity rates for ours, and I'm going to show you some of these numbers and the escalation that we're seeing. So urine, we're testing in urine. Most of this stuff has only been tested for about the last 3 to 4 years. It's where we have any kind of substantial numbers. So in urine, for those individuals that are testing fentanyl in urine, we have a positivity rate of 1.5%. Oral fluids is actually higher. It kind of goes back to perhaps no fake urine type of thing with oral fluids that we sometimes have. But then when you get into the sweat patches, probation, parole, we have testing here. We're looking at, for those that want to test, it's like 10%. There's 10% of the people on the street are buying drugs that are contaminated or chose fentanyl as their drug. Now, as you are aware, there was a number of analogs or designer fentanyls. And, fentanyl is a tremendous drug. It is great for severe pain, post-operative pain, end of life types of things where people are dying from cancer and those types of things. It's a wonderful drug. But I don't want to ban fentanyl from, because so many people medically need it. They just need it. But the cartels started adding it to just about everything that you could think of. They added it to methamphetamine, they added it to cocaine, they added to, other opioids. So if you bought an oxy, it would have fentanyl, and thinking that this one oxy is going to make me a little bit better, feeling better, the fentanyl puts you over the edge and you die. Or you go into cardiac arrest or respiratory arrest and eventually cardiac arrest. So 60% of the pills on the street are found in combination. Now, as you may have heard over the last year or two, United States and China have been negotiating how to control this. And there's in the middle there's a 4-ANPP, which is critical to make fentanyl easily. And that's a starter chemical. You do a little bit more to the molecule and you now have fentanyl. So that's why you can make it in your garage and, work wherever you want to work to build this. You can make fentanyl. The problem with it is it's so, you have to control the dust, you have to control the powder and all of those types of things. So it is easy to make. Now, the reason there was designer fentanyls was that the process of regulation exempted the designers. So there was the analog law. And so several years ago, after all of these things happened, we ended up banning all of these designers, made them a Schedule 1 drug and a felony. So the fentanyl was easier to do. And we always found fentanyl as in the same samples that we had designers. The fentanyl always was there because they started with fentanyl and then added chemical compounds to it. So by dropping the designers, you still found everybody that has fentanyl, and they should or should not have a prescription. Now, the latest development with that is xylazine, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. Now, a little bit about the drug trafficking, and we'll kind of move this along. Now, the first time the DEA found fentanyl was like in 2014. It was under a pickup truck, and they identified it. It's 10.7 kilograms, which is about 23 pounds of fentanyl. So that was their very first test. Now, as you go along, and we'll go into this seizures issues along the Mexican-U.S. border. Now, there's in 2023, this is not even a full year, they've found 23,000 pounds of fentanyl. Now, if you kind of divide that out, 2 milligrams is potentially a lethal dose. If you adjust it, it's 5 billion lethal doses of fentanyl that they've been able to take off the street. What we don't know is how many is actually getting through, and it's obviously a lot. Now, the seizures, there's, if we look at the ports of entry, kind of go into 2015, there really wasn't anything. There's a line down the middle where they start breaking out some of these different ways that they're seizing. If it's at a port of entry, it's a border patrol. And so this is where all the concern is about how do we stop fentanyl coming into the United States. Now, remember that fentanyl is extremely potent. So a pound of fentanyl is worth tens of thousands of dollars, and it's pretty easy to try and smuggle something like that into the United States. It's much easier to do that than to say, well, I'm going to smuggle marijuana into the United States. I need vast shipping containers to move very much. So we are having tremendous problems at the border from 2018 to 2022. The confiscation rates up 640%. Now, this is a little data from CRL. We did some work with the federal government, and what we did was we took 300 morphine positives. So these are not randoms. These are people that have opiates in their system already. And then we identified them, and then we started looking for 6-am, heroin, metabolite, and also fentanyl. And it was quite shocking at the amount of drugs that we found. Out of those 300 positive morphines, 16% also had heroin in them. 23% had fentanyl in them, and 10% of those had both. So you know that the illicit drug use is going on. These are workplace samples. They're not probation, parole, drug rehab, any of those types of things. These are people that they're in the workforce. If it was pre-employment, they drove to the collection site high on drugs or drugs in their system, or they're working in your workplace with drugs in the system. So we saw very high levels. in these samples. These are higher than, to indicate that it was sometime in the distant past. Okay. So we took a look at our urine data. Yeah, this is urine data. This is the trend line. So in 2020 is about when we started having a substantial number of samples that we started looking at, and it was somewhere around 0.5 plus percent, 5.57, something like that. Now, by the time we got into the fourth quarter of 2023, we're at 1.5%. So you can see the trend line going up in urine. Now, we did see in quarter two in 2023, we saw a dip, but I don't know what that was due to, but the trend line is there. It is going up. There is no dips, no plateaus that we can see. Now, this one is a similar type of thing with oral fluids. So, oral fluids, it's a witness collection and all of that sort of thing. We always expect the drugs to have a shorter life in oral fluids than in urine, but we are actually Q4. You can see that trend line. It's a much sharper trend line, and we're over 2%. So 1 out of 50 people is actually, is that the right number? Well, 2 out of 100, 1 out of 50 have measurable amounts of fentanyl in them, again, if you test. Now, those two slides and plus the next couple, I did provide to the HHS. There was a drug testing advisory board meeting in December. And part of that was the discussion of the addition of fentanyl to the program. Now, this slide looks like doesn't look too impressive, to be honest. However, it has a tremendous amount of information that can be used. Now, on the vertical column on the left is the concentration of fentanyl that we saw in the urine. So it goes from 0 to 20. Okay. At the bottom is these numbers. There's about 3,500 fentanyl positive samples, and we're doing somewhere around 20,000 samples a month in that range. Now, what I can do with this, see if the cursor will work, the discussion now is what level should we test at? Should it be 1? Should it be 5? Should it be 8 or 10? And what you can use this chart, let's say we're going to test at 4, okay? We could take this 4 value, this is what we found, and then we draw across over here, and if we go down, it's like 1426. So if we test at 4, there's 1,400 people that we would not find, okay? Now, if we went to 1, then it comes to 500, 600. So the federal government can use this number, this chart goes up to thousands of nanograms. But we left it here fairly limited so that you can extrapolate. If we pick a level, how many are we going to find? How many people fall off? So we report down to 0.5 nanograms, and so that's what this represents. So we have a lot of samples. If we want to pick 20, I mean, now, you lose 2,000 or basically about half of everything that you had before. Now, fentanyl, we didn't get into metabolism. Oops, wrong direction. But there is a metabolite. It's called norfentanyl, and we report both. And we did the same thing here. So you could pick, if the government wants to choose which metabolite, if they want to look for parent or if they want to look for metabolite, they can look to see how many people are we going to find, how many people are we going to lose. So that is a very important chart. It doesn't really explain everything for you, but in this case, we saw 1,200, 1,300 fentanyl, those donors that were positive for norfentanyl. So we actually, in this case, found more fentanyl people than norfentanyl. Now, everybody seems to think that changing topics and getting into this little device here, it's easy to make pills. We talk, or you hear about it on the radio, the television, you see, or in the newspapers, the internet, you see all these fake pills. And they're all made to look like the real thing. Whether it's going to be an oxy pill, whether it's going to be a Xanax, and it doesn't have Xanax at all, it could have a designer benzo, or it could have fentanyl with it. You can make this stuff happen in your office. You could do it in your living room if you wanted to, because these are pill machines. You put the powder in up on top, you'd have to mix the powder very carefully, and every time you crank it with the compressible sugars, there's a bag of that on the side, you can make a pill. So depends on how fast you crank will determine how many pills you're going to make. You could probably make 10 a minute, 100 a minute. With the big, more industrial machines, you can make thousands per hour. So the problem with this, I mean, obviously anybody on the internet can buy one of these things. You can buy used, you can buy new. There's all kinds of things out there that you can use. But I've used these in the past in graduate school. So it's easy. You can make something multiple colored. You could use different colored sugars. You could go from hot pink to blue to green to polka dot. Anything you want can be made. So the question is, can you make a complete dispersion? How do you mix it? Is it you throw your sugar in and you throw a teaspoon of fentanyl in? How do you mix it? That's the important thing, so you don't get these hot tablets that are coming through. Now, there are some other things out there. It's not all doom and gloom. There's certainly plenty of reasons for concern. But at Houston, University of Houston, they are working on a vaccine. Now, we've heard a lot about vaccines, the COVID vaccines, the flu vaccines, just about anything that you want. Now, this one is a little bit unique in that it was developed by the Department of Defense money, that they created these anti-fentanyl antibodies that you can inject someone with. And what it does is that it interferes, it attracts the fentanyl and it blocks it from entering the brain. And so you aren't going to have the respiratory depression, the subsequent heart attack, because of oxygen. And so it works, at least in primates. The last I've seen was done in monkeys. It worked very well. But it is specific to fentanyl. So if you had, God forbid you had some family member that was addicted to narcotics and they were using these things, there is a potential solution. The one thing that you can't do is be on this this vaccine and then go to the hospital and get fentanyl, because it will block the fentanyl. But you could take other drugs such as oxycodone, morphine, Dilaudid, and whatever. Now, we're getting close to the end. This is a fairly short, abbreviated talk, but this talk can't really work without having some discussion about xylazine that's been talked about. Now, xylazine is, it's like, why would anybody pick xylazine as a drug to add to fentanyl? It's really a difficult thing to understand or why they would use it, except that it makes fentanyl more potent. There's a potency with this. It relaxes people. It's used in veterinary, and reading, it's used like small animal vets to sedate small animals, can be used up as big as horses, and it is that part that makes it so difficult. is that it adds to the effect. It is not reversed with Narcan. And so you can add the Narcan, which is used to treat the opiate overdose, but this still hangs on. There is no treatment of in humans for this. There is a tolazine, which is a veterinary drug that, in large animals, if you want to reverse the xylazine that you gave it, you could do that and they do respond. But there is no human use approval for treatment of xylazine overdoses. Now, the one thing that makes xylazine unique, I guess, is it has some similar effects to a drug that we used to call crocodile. That was kind of created in Russia initially. It was made with codeine, and you extract it with gasoline and phosphorus, and you made this pseudo narcotic. And it became very popular, but they never cleaned it up very well. So you ended up with the big sores, the big lesions. You would inject in your veins, and all of those chemicals would attack it. Now with xylazine, if you keep it in the vein or wherever you are, it won't create too much of a problem for you. But if it gets outside the vein, it will cause, tissue degradation. I've seen horrible things on the internet. So if you are a xylazine, if you've been using xylazine inadvertently, and you will get these horrible sores that will just eat your tissue away down to the bone. It will just destroy you as you use that. So it is something to watch for, if, with your family, with people at the workplace, if they start having these sores that don't seem to heal, it's kind of like for more elderly people, like bed sores type of thing. It just destroys your tissue. Now, there are some challenges. We're getting here at the end. The people say, well, why don't we add drugs? It's difficult. The federal HHS wants to be able to change panels frequently, but it takes years to implement. So it takes a lot of thought, and this is where some of the charts that I've been presenting to HHS is, you see the trend line. Where's it going in the workplace? They're worried about workplace public safety, especially in the DOT sector. So I've given them the levels. What level should we be testing at? Then you have all of those questions that have to be answered, and certainly there's always the drugs that are here today and gone tomorrow. So the non-federal people programs, the employers can add drugs, take drugs away as they see a need for their program. With fentanyl, though, it seems like doesn't seem to be an end to that. We can control the importation of 4-AMPP, but there are other chemicals that further up the line, so you can build this to build more fentanyl. So it is a continued problem. I don't see any resolution to this. It's just a profit-driven market, and 70,000 people are dying a year. It's more than the wars we've been having. So somehow we have to get control of that. So I've kind of reached the end of my talk. We have hopefully a little bit of time for questions, and we'll turn this back over to Thomas, I guess. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kuntz. That was great information. Again, it's obviously a trend that's not going away, to your point. What I heard is that it's easier to make, and it's even easier to make more and more potent by improper mixing and not being as careful as one might be in a pharmaceutical setting. And so that's why the volumes and potency just continue to increase year over year. Is that right?
Oh, that's definitely correct. And China's kind of put some controls on this, but it's also being shipped through India and every other place that you can get it smuggled in. It's being smuggled due to the high profit margins.
Gotcha. Some questions from the audience. You mentioned that the HHS may add fentanyl to their panel. How likely is that to happen, and will the DOT follow if the HHS does?
There was the Drug Testing Advisory Board meeting in December. The comments to their proposal was supposed to be back January 4th, I believe, and they're going to take a look at that. There is definitely a desire to add. I think that's a given. Now, the timing of this is a little bit suspect, because they haven't decided the cutoff. It's what the data was for. They don't know if they want a parent drug, a metabolite, that has to be FDA approved. Then you have to put the program's going to be out there for the laboratories to have a proficiency testing. So it's at least a year to make some of these things happen. So hopefully that does occur. Now, it does have an impact potentially. When it comes out is, as you all know, there's federal oral fluids talked about. I mean, they talk about that a lot. And when is that available? So it's been already announced to me, at least with DOT people, that they can't have oral fluids that test for everything but fentanyl, and the urine can test for fentanyl. They all have to match. So they have to come out together, which would have, again, additional impact to the timing, which is unfortunate because we got an epidemic going on. It's like we have a war every year of losing people, and we have to find a way to solve that. So it will be a while, but it's being worked on aggressively, if you will.
Gotcha. You showed some positivity rates for fentanyl. Question is, are those positivity rates are way higher than I expected? Are more companies testing for it?
There are more people adding it all the time. Now, I do want to point out that the data was scrubbed, so we didn't put in like rehab centers and those types of things. This is truly workplace data. So it is, companies are adding it. I think the pressure, public pressure to do something is making the employers take a look and make sure that their job sites are safe.
Well, Dr. Kuntz, I know we didn't get to a ton of questions, but we want to be respectful of the time of our attendees. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day today to be here with us.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's hopefully I shared some information you didn't already know.
Yeah, oh, definitely, definitely. Well, again, to our audience, thank you so much for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you in some other sessions throughout the week. Goodbye.
All right, thank you so much. Bye now.